They say you never truly know a place until you have spent a night there completely alone. I learned that lesson the hard way when I moved into apartment 402. It was a cheap, top-floor studio in an old brick building on the edge of town. The rent was suspiciously low, but as a college student drowning in debt, I didn't ask any questions. I just signed the lease and took the keys. Looking back, I should have realized that some deals are simply too good to be true. The building itself was a relic. It had peeling wallpaper in the hallways, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry hornets, and a heavy wooden front door that always seemed to stick when you tried to push it open. But inside, my apartment was decent enough. It had high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a small kitchen that overlooked the alleyway. The first few days of living there were entirely normal. I spent my time unpacking boxes, organizing my books, and trying to make the place feel like home. It was on the third night that things started to change. I was cleaning out a deep, dark closet in the hallway. It was one of those awkwardly shaped closets that go back much further than they should. While I was sweeping the back corner, I noticed a loose floorboard. Out of pure curiosity, I pried it up. Tucked away in the dusty space underneath was an old baby monitor. It was one of those cheap, white plastic models from the early 2000s. It was yellowed with age, covered in a thick layer of grime, and its antenna was slightly bent. I laughed it off. I didn't have a baby, and I lived alone. I figured the previous tenant must have dropped it down there and forgotten about it. I decided to keep it as a weird, quirky souvenir of my first real apartment. I placed the receiver unit on my nightstand, right next to my bed, and I left the camera unit sitting on the kitchen counter, pointing out toward the small living room. I didn't plug them in. I didn't think much of it at all. I went to sleep that night feeling perfectly safe. But at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a soft, rhythmic crackling. I opened my eyes and looked around my dark bedroom. The sound was coming from the nightstand. I reached over and realized that the baby monitor receiver was turned on. The small green power light was glowing brightly in the darkness. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I knew for a fact that I hadn't plugged it in. In fact, it didn't even have a power cord attached to it. It was running on old, dead batteries that somehow still had juice. I listened closely to the speaker. It was just white noise, static. I sighed, assuming the internal wiring was just messed up, causing it to short circuit and turn on. I reached out to turn the volume dial down and click it off. But right before my fingers touched the plastic, the static stopped. The room went dead silent. And then I heard a sound coming from the speaker that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps. And they weren't coming from the apartment upstairs. They were coming through the baby monitor. The camera unit was in my kitchen, which meant whatever was making those footsteps was inside my apartment. I froze. I stopped breathing. I stared at my bedroom door, which I always left slightly cracked open. The hallway outside was pitch black. Through the monitor, I could hear the footsteps moving across the linoleum floor of the kitchen. Scuff, scuff, scuff. It sounded like someone dragging their feet, wearing heavy boots. I listened as the footsteps moved away from the kitchen and onto the hardwood floor of the living room. They were getting closer to my bedroom. I slowly, silently slid my hand under my pillow and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely unlock the screen. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the bedroom door. The footsteps through the monitor stopped. Whoever or whatever was out there knew I was awake. I waited for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The monitor remained completely silent. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I managed to convince myself that the old device was just picking up radio interference from a neighbor's apartment. Old tech does that sometimes, right? It picks up baby monitors from a block away. That had to be it. I finally forced myself to close my eyes and went back to sleep. The next morning, the bright sunlight made the fears of the night before seem ridiculous. I walked into the kitchen, made some coffee, and looked at the camera unit sitting on the counter. It was completely dead. No lights, no sounds. I threw it in the trash can, feeling stupid for getting so scared. I took the receiver from my bedroom and tossed it in the trash as well. Problem solved. I went about my day, went to my classes, and didn't give it another thought. But when I came back,